Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Shmuel Paulin. Welcome back. We have a very special episode for you today. This is a first for me. I'm actually having on a guest, and he's a very special guest, and we are old family friends. Larry, how long have we known each other?
Well, Shmuel, I've known you since before you were born.
Okay, that's a long time. And we're
It
going to
is.
talk a lot. We're going to talk a lot about dating things. So it's important to date our friendship as well. Yeah, they are friends of my parents. So, from before I was born, absolutely. Um, and I just want to say that in the past couple videos, I've been sort of critical of modern science, questioning the speed of light, questioning the speed of gravity, pi, things like that. But what's interesting is, in my opinion, that science gets it right when it comes to the Bible. A lot of things within science confirm the existence of facts and dates and people that existed during the times of the Bible. And Dr. Larry Vacera will help take us through some of these things that are evidence of the veracity of the Bible and its details. And maybe the doctor will just tell us a little bit about his credentials and maybe a little bit of the story of how you came to this kind of science, how you came into this um, evidence-based approach to science that confirms the Bible, and you didn't get sucked into the more popular atheist notions and the atheist approach to the Bible. How did you come to a more Judeo-Christian perspective?
Well, actually, I like to, tell people that I was raised as an ultra-Orthodox atheist. I firmly believe that science had disproved the Bible. How I was raised, from New York. My mother's Italian, my father was Jewish, and he was a very, he was a Stalinist, really. I understand Marxist Leninist. He was a Stalinist. This because I'm almost 80, and this was in New York. Growing up, in New York, that was the atmosphere in his generation. But with I really believe that. I believe that anything supernatural was, the idea of God. To me, God and the tooth fairy were on equal footing. But what happened is, as well with my education, I've I've spent my life in research in a lot of different fields. I have published research in 7 or 8 fields now, in paleontology and archaeology, in defense, in economics, in I even forget. At any rate, I got my first doctorate at Stanford University in the 70s in policy analysis. And I did some work for in Washington and Sacramento on it. Then later on, I left the field, and then I went back to school when I was about 40 and got a second PhD in political economy from the Claremont College's graduate school.
San Diego?
No, the Claremont Colleges in Pomona, Harvard, that group of colleges. They have a combined graduate school between them. I also did a half of a PhD in archaeology, and I have a couple of masters in other fields. And I spent a lot of time in school. But what happened was I began at some point in my life, I began questioning my atheism. A number of things had happened in my life that just didn't make sense. I don't know if you know this, Shmuel, but when I met your dad, he was also an atheist.
Really?
Yeah, he was. And actually, we both sort of went through our transition at about the same time in years, not really much influencing each other, but just sort of parallel in time. But at any rate, what I came to see was that you could not explain everything that we're seeing in the world today without the supernatural, without God. You know, one of the last places you would expect for someone to have an epiphany about God would be in graduate school at Stanford.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, you know, like the most unlikely place of all. But oddly enough, when I was there was some research going on at the Stanford Research Institute on remote viewing that the CIA was funding. And Edgar Mitchell was an astronaut. He was one of the original Apollo astronauts, was involved with it. And what I saw in their research was that they were finding that there was actually something to, remote viewing, that the CIA was actually getting, the research was actually classified at the time. It's not any longer.
What is remote viewing for the audience?
What the remote viewing is seeing things at a distance. And what the CIA wanted to do was see if they could find certain people who had the ability to read documents that were in files in the Soviet Union from here.
Right, right.
And they did a number of tests. There's some YouTubes on it now. And they were actually getting positive results. And that just didn't make sense to me. How could this be? And it started me on a course of looking into other things that I had believed as a child in my atheism. And what I found was that many of the things I believed just simply were not true. A friend of mine challenged me to read the Bible. And I took him up on the challenge and I started reading the Bible. And I started, of course, with Genesis 1:1. And I was pretty shocked by what I found because I had actually started graduate school as an archaeologist. And I expected the Bible to be filled with a bunch of fantasy and so on. And I was shocked that it wasn't at all, that there was a lot of verifiable information in the Bible. And of course, you know, as I read through it, I began seeing an awful lot of historical events that were accurately described. And this really shook my atheism. Plus, there were some other things in my life that just, you know, didn't quite make sense, you know, from an atheist perspective, you know, and also, you know, living as an atheist is really not very much fun. you know, I mean, you really miss a lot. There's no meaning, there's no purpose. What is love? It's all irrelevant. You know, when you die, to throw you in the ground and, you know, throw dirt on your face, you know.
No heaven, no hell.
Right, no heaven,
No reason, no right and no wrong.
Yes. And of course, that was one of the things I had the most difficulty with is no right and no wrong. And talking to other atheists, you know, I mean, what I found is that I, like most atheists, were very opinionated about all kinds of things, had very strong feelings about all kinds of things, you know, what was right and what was wrong. But if anyone challenged me on it, how could I justify it? You know, was Hitler wrong? Well, with no God, I don't like what he did. Okay, that's my opinion. You know, how do I say, you know, he was.
I always say that he believed he was doing the best thing he could do for his country, and so did all the Germans. They believed they were doing the right thing, and who is to tell him that it's not the right thing if not for God? I don't see how you could convince anyone out of that, you know, with any authority.
You're right. And I've read many atheist, attempts to come up with some way of having an objective morality, and they can't do it. You cannot do it. Once you're, as Nietzsche said, without God, all things are permissible. And there's really no arguing with it. If you remove God, you remove any sort of absolute standard. And then, what difference does it make what you do? You can become a homicidal murderer, or you can, become and, invent penicillin. There, yeah,
I mean, and I always thought that even if they could come up with some way of determining what's right and wrong, how would they implement it when there's so many other people that disagree with their idea of right and wrong, and they're not going to let your opinion. I mean, you don't even have a unified opinion to protest. You don't have any authority with which to implement that which you think is right and wrong, because somebody who's stronger and their idea of right and wrong will overtake you.
Right. It comes down to force.
Yeah.
And something that always amused me is that, people will say, well, morals are relative. They're relative. Well, relative to what? When you say something is relative, there's a standard you have to compare it to. Like I'm relatively short, but you put me with pygmies, I'm relatively tall. I mean, that is the most ridiculous argument, and that's something that you will find amongst atheists almost universally. They'll say, well, morality is relative. But then you ask them, well, relative to what? Something can't be relative to nothing. And, they have no answer to that, because without a standard, without an absolute standard, such as the Bible, it's a meaningless thing.
Yeah, it's just it's just the strong survive, and every day it changes. Morality, in the secular system changes every single day because new people become in charge. Like Twitter had its idea of right and wrong, and now somebody else took it over, and he has his idea of what's right and wrong because he bought it. Now he has the right to decide what's right and wrong, but none of them really know what they're talking about because they don't have any basis for what they're saying or what they're doing. There's no Bible, there's no Judeo-Christian values. They're just basically making it up as they go along.
Yeah. There was a very interesting book that was written a number of years ago on constitutional law, because there's been a movement to detach the Constitution and our law from its Judeo-Christian roots, that were founded, the biblical roots, the 10 Commandments. At the heart of it all, at the base of it all, the 10 Commandments.
Right.
Well, there's been this attempt to detach them. And in this book that was very popular at the time, I think the title was Do the Courts Rule America? And the conclusion of the authors were, yeah, the courts do rule America, but that's okay because the courts make decisions based on ethical values. Well, then they went into, well, where did these ethical values come from? And because they couldn't place it in the Bible, they concluded, well, it's elite opinion in our best universities. So they were actually, and this was the dominant and still is the dominant view, that our laws are not, you can't ground them in the Bible. So what do you ground them in? Well, what professors at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, whatever think. And of course, as you just pointed out, that changes their time.
Yeah.
200 years ago, those guys thought slavery was fine.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's so interesting. So I thought we would, after discussing moral relativism as we just have, we would talk about some of the things that science has actually confirmed what it says in the Bible. And the first question that I think we need to answer is who is the author of the Bible? Was it Moses? Was it not Moses? And what does the archaeology say, because Judaism has itself a tradition that it was written by Moses, and it's a very strong tradition. And I think that tradition is important to history, and we all, Jews universally, have the tradition that Moses wrote it. But I think you have some interesting information about the archaeology that would indicate that he wrote it.
Yeah, the biggest claim supporting the idea that Moses could not have written the Bible was the observation that writing a book like the Bible, given it the context of it, the material contained in it, it could not have been written in a non-alphabetic language, and that there was no alphabetic language at Moses' time. There were only either hieroglyphics or cuneiform. And this was the basis of, the primary basis of excluding Moses as the author of the Bible. If he didn't have an alphabetic language, he couldn't have written it. If you were writing it in hieroglyphics, there are many subtle things in the Bible and its language that you couldn't express in hieroglyphics. Also, glyptic writing is so difficult. The books would be huge, and also if it had been written in cuneiform, on clay tablets, a Bible would weigh about 90 tons. You're trying to write the whole Bible. I'm not that much, but it weighed tons. And of course, we know Moses, was a prince of Egypt, and he would have been familiar with hieroglyphics, but hieroglyphics would not have done. Well, there have been a whole bunch of breakthroughs now in the study of paleography, and we now know for sure that alphabetic writing in the area of Canaan, apparently alphabetic writing first appeared in Canaan, and that appeared about at least 1800 BC. Interestingly enough, this just came out the other day. This is the oldest piece of alphabetic writing that has ever been found. It was dug up at Lachish, and it dates to 1700 BC. So this would have been about 300 years probably before Moses.
Yeah, just so the audience is aware, the Jewish view is that the Bible was written down by Moses in the year 1313 BCE. So we're talking about 500 years, 300 years before that. So that's a good placement there.
Yeah, this it's interesting. It's a little ivory comb, and it has an inscription on it. And the inscription, and this is the inscription, and it's written in Proto-Canaanite, and it reads, let's see where, the inscription on the ivory comb, it reads, "May this tusk," it was made from an elephant tusk, "may this tusk root out the lice of the hair in the beard." And at any rate, it appears that now we know that the alphabetic writing first appeared in, and what's emerging now, not just from this, but from a whole bunch of studies, that alphabetic writing first emerged around in 1800 BC, and in the Canaanite area, which of course is where Jacob and his family came from. And so that they already, the earliest Jews, the very earliest Jews would have at least had the opportunity to know an alphabetic language. And what's emerging, it may be that Hebrew was actually the first alphabetic language. And alphabetic languages are vitally, vitally, vitally important, because for a number of reasons. Of course, one of the things is that, you can take a book like the Bible and you can reduce it and put it into a relatively small document. The other thing is that and the most important thing is that alphabetic languages are very easy to learn compared to glyptic languages. You know, the little pictures like in Chinese or Egyptian hieroglyphics, you need a different or a different set of characters for every word. So in Chinese, you have to learn 50,000 characters or more. And same in Egyptian, in hieroglyphic writing. So it's a tremendous task. So you need professional scribes that are highly trained and so on. But the brilliance of alphabetic writing is now you can teach a 5, 6-year-old kid to read, because if they can know how to speak, then they know how to write, because the idea, the great breakthrough was that, you would see the letters represented sounds, and you could see the letter make the sound, and you would speak the word. So at any rate, we now know that Moses almost certainly, we know that there was alphabetic writing in the area amongst his people at that time. And of course, we can't prove that he had access to it, but the Bible tells us that he wrote it. I'm finding an extra biblical source for that was rather difficult, given the age and so on. But we do have one written source, and that's the Bible. And now we have archaeological evidence that that was the case. Here's another little interesting one. This is known as the Lachish shard. And it was also found at Lachish. And it's part of a broken milk bowl. And and this dates to about 1450 BC. And this is really interesting because this little inscription that you can see here, it's in Proto-Hebrew. Now, we talk about Proto-Hebrew and Proto-Canaanite, but we really can't distinguish between them very well because they're virtually identical languages. We're not sure if the differences in them just have to do with the way that people were writing the letters. Like if you look at, writing in different European countries, there's italics and Gothic and so on, and they're stylistically different. But you can make out the same language. Well, the same is true for Proto-Hebrew and Proto-Canaanite. At any rate, this little fragment, what it says on it is that it says the keeper of the let's see what it say. Oh, rats. I should have underlined it. Well, of course, from Exodus 3:17, we know that Exodus 3:17 reads, "And I have promised to bring you up out of the land of misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey." And interestingly enough, what this is the oldest piece of Paleo-Hebrew that we have, and it's on a milk bowl, and it reads, "Servant in charge of the honey." Is that great or what? I mean,
well, because Israel was known as the land flowing with milk and honey.
Right. And here we have it written on a shard that has been dated. And by the way, the dating on it is not questioned. It's been dated by carbon-14, and it's been dated stratigraphically, and it's also been dated paleographically. And all of it places it at about right around 1450 BC. So this would have probably been written just before the Exodus, about 100 years before the Exodus. So already by this time, we know that there were, the Hebrew. I don't know what the of course, we're told that the Jews start with Jacob, so these would have been Jacob's ancestors, but they were already writing in an alphabetic language at least 100 years before. Before this is when, well, Jacob would have been, of course, and his people would have been, presumably would have already been in Egypt sometime, but also, there were still some of the same people related people were writing at this time. So we know that Jacob would almost certainly, or Jacob's children, Joseph and so on, would have had familiarity with it. They would have had access to this. And of course, then 400 years later, well, this one, puts an alphabetic language more in the time of Joseph's frame. This one puts alphabetic more in the frame of Moses' time. So we know that now Moses could have written the Bible because he had alphabetic language. And, so the claim that Moses could not have been written the Bible is now has been proven by archaeology and paleography, to be false. It's not maintainable. The idea that Moses wrote the Bible, you cannot exclude it by the claim that he didn't have alphabetic language. We know alphabetic language for sure was there, and that the Jews had it in the right time frame and in the right place.
Right. That's really, really fascinating. Larry, let's take a 5-minute break, and I'll give you a new link. And I just want to make sure that the recording is going well. And I also have some groceries that I need to pick up from my doorstep. So
Okay.
let's come back in 5 minutes with a new link. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Very good. And I'll just click off this link.
When we come back, I want to just let you know that I want to talk about the 53 people that you say existed in the Bible according to the archaeology.
Very good. Okay.
Okay. All right.